This is lesson number 6 of Fallen Foes, a study in biblical demonology. And we began last week with the question, who is Baal? Baal or Baal, you'll sometimes hear it pronounced. And this is the follow-up to that question. So it's part number 2 of who is Baal. Lesson 5 was an in-depth study from Isaiah 14, 12 through 15, identifying that Satan's pride led to his downfall. Bible cross-references identify Satan's intention of conquering Mount Zion, God's holy mountain. And we ended that lesson by showing that while Satan was not successful at overthrowing God, he has not stopped trying. And the site of the Red Sea crossing, as listed in Exodus 14 and Numbers 33, is referred to as Baal or Baal Zaphon, which is a mountain at the Red Sea crossing. There's another mountain we looked at, also by the same name, which is not mentioned in Scripture, but it is historically the mountain that Baal set up his rule from, and that is in Turkey, near the Syrian border, which is in northern Israel. Even though it's not mentioned in Scripture, it's quite relevant, for if you plot on a map the mountain in the top of the north of the Red Sea and the mountain in north of Israel, the ancient writings show that Baal has his feet on two mountains. And in between those two mountains falls the city of Jerusalem, where God's holy mountain is, the Temple Mount. The application is that Satan is indeed still today trying to rule over God's mountain. Has Satan had success in ruling over God's mountain? I would suggest the answer is yes. Israel witnessed their temple destroyed on 2 separate occasions. The first was through King Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BC. The second was by the Romans in 70 AD. Has Israel recaptured possession of the Temple Mount yet since those times? No. In fact, what you will see is Mount Zion is still in the possession of someone not named the Jews, but rather God's holy mountain is currently under the possession of whom? The religion of Islam. Take heart, though, because Jesus Christ will come back and take possession of his holy mountain. Satan has not overthrown God, but God has allowed Satan to rule this world, and we indeed see that on a daily basis. So as we move further to answer this question, who is Baal, we're going to now look into Satan's identity a little bit further. First thing I want to establish with you tonight is that Baal or Baal is not simply an idol. Number one, Baal is not simply an idol. You know, our American mindset is that false gods, idols, are simply pieces of wood and stone. We don't really have what we would consider to be familiar idol worship in our society that we think of. There are ones who do it, and I'll suggest who they are in a moment. But Deuteronomy 32, 16 and 17 paints a very clear picture that idols are not simply wood or stone. They provoked him to jealousy with foreign gods. With abominations they provoked him to anger. They sacrificed to demons, not to God, to gods they did not know, to new gods, new arrivals that your fathers did not fear. Well, that's a very interesting verse, isn't it? We need to understand that in Scripture, God links idolatry to what? Demon worship. And the assumption is in Scripture, when people worship idols, those idols represent demons themselves. Now, demons by this verse are not omnipresent. For as there were demons who received worship in Egypt, and when now Israel is going towards the promised land, there seems to be a brand new set of demons and gods they had never encountered before. The demons in Egypt were not necessarily the ones in Canaan. Today, the demons in Gaza are not necessarily the demons in America. They all serve under one demonic prince, but we need to understand that when you talk about idol worship inside the scriptures, it's a reference to demonic worship. Major religions around the world still do offer prayers and worship requesting supernatural powers and answers to prayers from idols. It's found in religions such as Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Roman Catholicism. Demonic activity, in particular, is associated with religions that embrace a multitude of gods and goddesses. So when people have this natural desire to have contact with the supernatural world, they're often tapping into an interest in demonic beings. You understand that some psychics and mediums today are certainly not hoaxers because they have tapped into a supernatural realm. Understand that demons know much more about God than we do. It is true that Satan and his demons want to peel away worship from God and thrust it on themselves. Isn't this what Satan said in Matthew chapter 4, verse 9? And he, Satan, said to him, Jesus, all these things will I give you if you will fall down and worship me. Isn't that what Satan truly wants? Yes. You see, demons teach false doctrines in order to deceive people, specifically the church. 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 1. Now the Spirit expressly says that in latter times some will depart from the faith, giving heed to what? Deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons. That passage goes on to say there are markers or identities that we know is the doctrine of demons, particularly the forbidding of eating of meat and the forbidding of marriage. Two things involved greatly in some of the religions that I just mentioned. Those who worship false gods, wittingly or unwittingly, pledge their allegiance to demons who desire to usurp God's authority. So to the Christian, an idol seems to be nothing, right? And I think this is what Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 8. Therefore, concerning the eating of things offered to idols, we know that an idol is nothing in this world. I mean, yes, it is wood or stone. And even though it has a demon behind it, can that demon overpower the God of heaven? No. There is no other God but one, for even if there are so-called gods, that's a reference to demons, friends, whether in heaven or on earth, as there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God, the Father, of whom are all things. But demons certainly do try to deceive the world, so worship is set on themselves or their Lord and Master, Satan himself, instead of God. So when we come to talk about this entity of who is Baal, He's not just an idol made of stone. He's not something that's just made out of wood. What I'm suggesting is there is a demonic entity behind Baal of the Old Testament. However, if that's what your pastor is teaching, can he show you biblically that that is the case? So let's talk about this Baal. Baal is not just any old entity, but he has a specific personality. On the screen, I've got two images dating back many, many thousands of years before Christ that are images or idols of Baal. The name Baal appears in the Bible at least 156 times. That does not include personal names that have the name Baal in them. We have learned in this series names like Ishbosheth, Mephibosheth, Jezebel. Names ending in Bosheth or Bel are typically names ending in Baal. Baal is a title or a name given to the god of reproduction of childbirth and the acts that it takes in order to reproduce. Do you understand my gist? He is sometimes referred to as the god of fertility, and he's always described as the rain god of thunderstorms bringing rain. Now that is logical, because if you have the same deity ruling over human fertility, and that same deity rules over the rain, it's a growth process. Rain waters plants. Plants feed animals. Plants and animals feed people. Stop the rain, stop the process. So Baal is pictured as this god of thunderstorms, the one who brings or prohibits the rain. In ancient religions that worship multiple gods, you typically, not always, but you typically find the fertility god or goddess as usually at the top of the pantheon that's being worshipped. And I suspect this, that the reason it is so is because the god of fertility is a counterfeit of Israel's God who created the promised land, also known as the land of milk and honey. Understand that that terminology inside the Old Testament is a blessing to Israel because they can come to a land that is fertile. And when, what we saw on Sunday, they are obedient, what does God do to this land? He blesses it and it grows. When Israel is disobedient, what happens to the land? Drought, lack of rain. And so it's interesting that Baal is now credited with the lack of rain in Israel, and that is a counterfeit action of God. So the word Baal means Lord or ruler or Lord. It's often combined with other words to indicate specific meanings. In the last lesson, we saw Baal and Zaphon combined to identify specific mountains. Numbers 25, verse 3, also gives us another form of Baal. It's a place called Baal Peor, which literally means the Lord, there's Baal, and Peor, of the opening on the hill. Do you know what you call an opening on a hill? A cave. It is the god who lives in a specific location geographically in a cave on a hill named Peor. The Moabites worship this god who lived in a cave. So Baal Peor is worshipped in that cave through sensual, immoral practices by those who worshipped him. By adding Peor to the name, It signifies the specific identity of the demon behind the idol. Very literally, the Lord of Peor is a reference to a specific demon and not just a random piece of stone or wood. And so his worship in Numbers 25 shows 25,000 Israelites are killed by a plague because God curses them for worshiping Baal Peor. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 8, I believe Paul references it to this incident by saying, you remember what happened at Baal Peor where 20+ thousand people died? And there's a little bit of interesting wording going on with Paul. He doesn't cite the full 25,000. He cites the 23 to 24,000 that die in one day. But he doesn't reference the other 1,000 that the judges came through and actually killed for worshiping Baal. So the total number being 25,000. I can't be dogmatic, but it's very interesting that while Paul is writing to the church at Corinth who worship false gods, he cites this god Baal Peor. It seems to me like Paul is identifying the god of Corinth as Baal Peor. It's the same God that was worshipped in the Old Testament. Now, if we do research on Corinth, we find out the Greeks have a god by the name of Aphrodite. She is the goddess of Corinth. The Romans call her Venus. She is the god of sensuality and fertility. Notice the theme that runs through history. Of course, there's an objection, well, those are goddesses and not necessarily masculine gods like Baal Peor. Don't be troubled by the gender, folks. This gender identity crisis that the country is in right now is not a new thing. It's been going on for thousands and thousands of years through demonic influence. Baal Peor is an identity of a specific demon in a specific location. If we look at another Baal, we find out the Phoenician god, known as Hadad, is often called Baal in ancient texts and the Hebrew Bible. So Phoenicia. Where does Phoenicia lie? Simply in the north area of Israel, right on the coastline. So the city of Tyre will fall in that green circle that you see on that map. This is Phoenicia. Baal Hadad was the storm god and the rain god of the Canaanites all the way through the Mesopotamian region. And so if you would draw a crescent shape from Israel all over to Baghdad or Iraq, that would be the Fertile Crescent area. Baal was the god of that area in the name of Baal Hadad. Hadad is also called Pedar, Rapiu. Sometimes he's listed as Baal Zephon. Ever heard that one? Or simply Baal. Sometimes his name is even abbreviated as Bel, B-E-L. So Hadad equated, if you look in history, with the Greek god Zeus. It's the same god. And the Roman god Jupiter. It's still the same god. The ancient writings tell us of the Baal cycle, which is a collection of stories specifically about this Baal, Baal Hadad, the Lord over Hadad. He is the storm god. What most people don't understand is that the Bible does indeed reference Baal Hadad. Let me show you. Romans 11:4. What does the divine response say to him? I have reserved myself 7,000 men who have not bowed the knee to whom? Baal. This is Baal Hadad. Elijah refused to worship Baal Hadad. He thought he was quite lonely, but he wasn't. God says, no, there is a remnant that worships me and that are still faithful. We find Baal also in Matthew 10, 24 to 25, Mark 9:34. I'm sorry, Matthew 9:34, Mark 3:22, Matthew 12:24. However, his name isn't necessarily Baal Adad, but there is a reference. It's the same God. Now, when the Pharisees heard it, they said, "This fellow does not cast out demons except by Baal Zebub, the ruler of the demons." This word actually has two parts. The first one you obviously know as Baal. The second is Zebul, which means exalted dwelling. If you have a study Bible, you may look down in the notes and see that typically it's translated as Lord of the Flies. Have you ever heard that terminology before? The Lord of the Flies. That is an assumed definition of this name, Beelzebub. However, I would suggest to you, it's probably not a good translation. I don't think Beelzebub means Lord of the Flies. And you will often see Baal pictured as the dung god. The dung god, because flies consume dung. And in my mind, I go, who in the world want to worship that? That's pretty gross, right? I don't think they did. But I would suggest it's not Lord of the Flies. I would suggest to you after much study that it very may well be the Lord of the ones who fly. The Lord of the ones who fly. And he is the ruler of whom? Demons. So the biggest objection is that in Matthew 12, the Pharisees say, hey, look, Jesus is casting out demons, and he's using the power of Beelzebub, the Lord over the demons. Well, wait a minute, Pastor. That's what the Pharisees say, right? Here's the thing. Jesus never objects to the identification of Beelzebub. But watch what he does in verse 26. If Satan casts out Satan, he is divided against himself. How then will his kingdom stand? Do you just see what Jesus did right there? The Pharisees say, you are casting out demons by the power of the prince of demons, Beelzebub. And Jesus says, oh, I know. You're saying that Satan is casting out Satan. It makes no sense. It doesn't work that way. So let me ask you this. Who is Beelzebub according to Jesus? I mean, does it get any clearer? Not for me. Jesus refers to Beelzebub as the person Satan. In Luke 10:18, the 72 disciples come back and they say, Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name. And what does Jesus say? I know. I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. I know. What is he saying? I think it's a reference to where we started last week in Isaiah chapter 14. Satan said in his heart, the 5 I wills, they're nothing but pride, but I will essentially overthrow God himself. And Satan launches an attack upon the very gates of heaven with 1/3 of the angels, according to Revelation chapter 12. And Jesus says this, I saw the fall of Satan, and it was so powerful and so miraculous. How long did it take? Like a flash of lightning. You ever see a flash of lightning? You ever try to take a picture of a flash of lightning? You have to have a long exposure, don't you? That's the key. In just the blink of an eye, how quickly did it take the God of heaven to boot Satan's rebellion with 1/3 of the angels of heaven? in the blink of an eye, the flash of lightning. Ephesians chapter 2 refers to Satan as the prince of the power of the air. And he is still working in the sons of disobedience. He is not the king over the demons because he has no power to rule over the demons, because who has the power over all? The king, Jesus Christ, God himself. God is king. But according to 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4, he is indeed the God of this age. He is the God of this world. And Satan has an end. John chapter 12, verses 31 through 32, Jesus says, "Now this is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out. And if I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all peoples to myself." Number one, when was Satan first defeated? In the garden. Number two, when was he defeated? At the cross. And number three, what is going to happen next? Jesus Christ is returning. The second coming. Colossians 1:13 says that Christ has delivered us, believers, from the power of darkness and conveyed us into the kingdom of the Son of his love. However, 2 Timothy 2:26 says that unbelievers need to come to their senses and escape the snare of the devil, having been taken captive by him to do his will. This is a great spiritual battle, isn't it? Satan falls from heaven because of pride. The war does not stop. The war is still going on this very moment, and Satan even has possession of the Temple Mount. Now, I don't want you to think that God's been defeated in any way. It's just not God's time to wrap things up. And I find it very interesting when Scott's teaching in Sunday school and he says, Jesus, when he makes this statement, doesn't want it announced to everybody because the timing is not here yet. You can rest assured that the time is coming when Christ will judge Satan and his demons. It's just not here yet because God's plan is not complete yet. So what is this significance of Baal being tied to Isaiah 14? Why am I belaboring this? So what I want to do is I want to tie this all together. Remember in Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12, it specifically says, Satan makes the statement, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? I will ascend up into heaven." We have to go back to the start of Isaiah 14 and remember that it is written to whom? Two people, Nebuchadnezzar and Satan himself. So what I'm suggesting is that Isaiah 14, verses 12 through 15, are a reference to the god Baal. Baal worship ranged greatly from Babylon all the way over to Egypt. The Canaanites worshiped Baal in the forms of Molech. Have you heard of that false god before? And Shamash. Different names, different cultures, but certainly seeming to be the same god, the same demon. Baal's appearance, though, is also not hidden from the Old Testament or in ancient culture. If you look at the image behind me, the bull is the symbolic animal of Baal Hadad, and you are specifically looking at an image of Baal thousands of years before Christ. And if you see, on his head, he's wearing horns. He always carries a club to beat people. And this javelin of sorts is not just a javelin, it's actually a lightning bolt because he is the god of thunder. In this image, he's wearing a horned headdress, but yet it's still the same god, the Molech, the Shamash found in the Old Testament. When we look at Molech and Shamash being similar, he often appears as half bull, half man, in which we would call him a Taurus, in which his arms are stretched out and a fire is built underneath those arms so that children are dropped onto the hot iron burning arms of Molech for child sacrifice. It is the bull god, Molech. And I'm suggesting to you it is the same god as Baal, Baal Adad. The name Baal Zebub instead of Beelzebub, it's just a translation issue, is found in 2 Kings 1 through 18. Baal Zebub is a reference to the god of King Ahab and his family. Ahab's son, Ahaziah, injured himself and sends messengers to Baal Zebub to inquire whether or not he will recover. And this is where God steps in 2 Kings chapter 1. God sends Elijah to rebuke Ahaziah for praying to Baal. Now remember, Jesus confirms for us that Baal is the prince of demons and Satan himself. Ahaziah doesn't get deliverance. He actually will die to his injuries of sickness. And we find in the chapter that God kills 52 men with fire directly sent from heaven because they are Baal worshipers. Where did Ahaziah and Ahab get this concept of Baal worship from? Well, that's an easy answer because that is brought to Ahab by his wife. Her name is Jezebel. Can you hear the name Baal in her name? Jezebel. And we have shortened it to Bel. Her name means, who is Baal? Who is Baal? Her story is found throughout 1st and 2nd Kings. She is the daughter of Ithobal the first, king of Tyre. He's a priest and the leader of the cult of Baal in the city of Tyre, who required human sacrifice and sensual lewdness in worship. I'm hoping that the mentioning of Tyre is beginning to send off bells and whistles in your mind because we have studied Tyre in this study already. Because in Ezekiel 28, we studied the prince of Tyre. He was the human king of the city. And then we studied the king of the city that the prince submits to. 900 years after Jezebel and her father, Ezekiel wrote that the human leader of Tyre is still serving the king of Tyre. The true king of Tyre is described this way. He is the anointed cherub who covers. What? I'm assuming it's the throne of God. He was lifted up in pride and expelled from God's holy mountain. Who is the king of Tyre? It's Satan, friends. It's Satan. And I'm suggesting to you his name is Baal. It's the same deity. Now, Ezekiel doesn't give us the name Baal, but 2 Kings chapter 1 and Jesus certainly do. Tyre, Phoenicia, was dedicated to Baal worship. Jezebel brought it over from Tyre, brought it to Israel, and made it into Israel's state religion under King Ahab. Here's what's interesting. Going back a few lessons, do you remember the appearance of the cherubim in Ezekiel chapters 1 and 10? Do you remember them? Ezekiel 1 said that these ones had faces of a man, an eagle, a lion, and an ox. The cherubim of Ezekiel chapter 10, however, don't look like that. There's a difference in their description. However, I believe that they are actually the same beings. It's just that the facial description is described in a certain way. They had a face of a man, a face of an eagle, a face of a lion, just like chapter 1. But there's one difference in their appearance. What is it? The cherubim of Ezekiel chapter 10 have the face of a cherub. What is the face of a cherub? Well, Ezekiel chapter 1 tells us the face of a cherub is an ox or a bull. Now, two things I suspect, won't be dogmatic, but I suspect that the cherubim in Ezekiel chapter 1 and 10, pulling God's chariot, are different in appearance than the cherubim. This does not bother me in any way, because when I get to Revelation, I find out that the seraphim have different appearances too. They form in different identities, although they are still seraphim. I think the cherubim in Ezekiel 1 and 10 use the four faces for navigation with those wheels. They are the motors to the wheels. They don't need to turn. They have the four faces that turn. But I suspect, number two, that a typical cherub has the face of a bull because of the wording that Ezekiel uses and switches out cherub and ox or bull so easily in his writings. So who is this Baal? Isaiah 14 is where we'll conclude this evening. Chapters written Nebuchadnezzar II, who ruled over Babylon from 605 BC until about 605 BC. He passed away in 562 BC. The city of Babylon is located about 100 miles south of modern-day Baghdad, Iraq. God used Nebuchadnezzar greatly. He sent Nebuchadnezzar to judge Jerusalem in 586 BC. And this is where we pick up the story of Daniel, who was taken as a captive over to the Babylon in the Babylonian captivity. Here's what's interesting about Babylon, since we know the location. It's an amazing site for excavation. German archaeologist, I'll get that right, Robert Koldewey led an excavation to the site of Babylon from 1904 to 1914. He uncovered what is known as the Ishtar Gate. And here it is on site. The Ishtar Gate is the 8th gate to the inner city of Babylon, near Nebuchadnezzar's palace and temple. The walls were absolutely amazing. Obviously, you can't see it in this picture as they have degraded over thousands of years. But they were finished in blue glazed bricks. And so one artist's rendition of these gates, pictures of how beautiful it must have been to walk into Babylon. Germany did something unique with these findings. They actually built a recreation of the gates of Babylon in Berlin, Germany, and you can go and visit them even to this day. Here is a picture of a recreation of the gates of Babylon entering the inner sanctum of King Nebuchadnezzar. Notice that there are images carved all over the gates of Babylon. The gates stand at 50 feet high. The original foundations go down to 45 feet underground to support them. There is a lengthy description of Nebuchadnezzar himself on the gates, and this inscription begins with these words: Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, the pious prince appointed by the will of Marduk, the high priest, the high priestly prince. And then it goes on to list many, many more things. And if you can see, all this gold writing, this is all cuneiform and different objects that tell this story of Nebuchadnezzar. And so that leads us to the question. Now we have another god. His name is Marduk. Marduk. Who is he? Well, Marduk is the god of the Babylonians. It is Nebuchadnezzar's god. He was not recognized as a chief god over other gods initially. However, he always had the designation known as the god of thunderstorms. Sound familiar? Legend says that Marduk conquered an evil monster by the name of Tiamat. Sometimes you'll find Tiamat's name as Apsu. Apsu. Who is depicted as either a dragon or a serpent. And once he defeated Tiamat, you are looking at Baal Adad defeating Tiamat. And this is so interesting. So this is actually a relief that's carved into a temple by the name of Nimrod in the city of Nineveh. It's now, I believe, in England on display inside of a museum. Apsu is depicted as a dragon or a serpent, and his defeat vaulted Marduk to stardom. Is it a coincidence that Tiamat had the form of a serpent or dragon? Have you ever heard of that description before? Do you know any other being in the Bible that takes on that particular description? How about Satan in the Garden of Eden? Serpent. How about the great dragon of Revelation chapter 12? You know, something to consider. In Genesis chapter 3, verse 14, when God cursed the serpent, he actually said, "On your belly you shall go, and you shall eat dust all the days of your life," which implies that the serpent did not crawl on its belly originally. What do you call a dragon without legs? A serpent. On the Ishtar Gate, after Marduk overthrew Tiamat, Marduk's symbol launched him to stardom, and he became the dragon serpent. And so on Nebuchadnezzar's gates of Babylon, you will find his symbol, which is called the Mushushu. This is the god Marduk. He is a dragon. He has legs. He is a serpent. Is this a coincidence? I don't think so. Marduk was allegedly born on the planet Nibiru. Ever heard of it? Nah, me neither. But if you look deep enough, you will find that Nibiru is the star of Marduk. And there's some confusion whether Nibiru is a 10th planet inside of our solar system or if it's an existing one. However, today I came across an Akkadian reference, which is dating many thousands of years before Christ, that actually associates Nibiru with a particular planet in our universe. And it is the planet Venus. Do you know the Latin name for Venus? Lucifer. Star of the morning. Coincidence? I'll let you decide. That is the Mushushu. That is Marduk. You are looking at the great dragon, the great serpent on the gates of Nebuchadnezzar's Ishtar Gate. However, the second god in Nebuchadnezzar's gate is Baal Adad. Simply Baal will do, or Baal. And guess what form he takes on? Well, there he is. He is a bull, just like he is throughout history. If you dig deep enough, you're going to find out that Baal is closely associated with the god Horus in Egypt. From Horus, he's Baal, to Zeus, to Jupiter. He is all the same God. I believe it is Satan himself. So how does this tie to Isaiah chapter 14? Well, this is the interesting thing. Remember that Isaiah chapter 14 addresses not one individual, but how many? Two. And who are they? Nebuchadnezzar and Satan. Those two are inseparable. Do you know why? Because Nebuchadnezzar worshipped Satan himself. Marduk, Adad, it's the same entity. It is Satan. I believe they're the same being. And Isaiah 14 truly is about the fall of Satan, but now it's in a much deeper way than I've ever understood it to be. And throughout history, Satan has made his identity known. He is not shy about who he is. Remember, he is lifted up in pride, and so he must tell of who he is and what he does. So whether it be Baal in Canaan, or Marduk or Hadad of Babylon, or Zeus in Greece, Jupiter in Rome, Satan has his fingerprints all over this world because he is the god of this age and the prince of the power of the air. Does Satan have his fingerprints all over our modern world? What is his current name? I don't know. But as I think of the country that we live in, and I love our country dearly, I do come up with some idols. You know, one of the biggest idols in America today? What is it, Mom? Money. Money. Is it any coincidence that there is a 11-foot bull sitting on the center of money inside the United States of America? Now, that's a fascinating story of how this bull was delivered in 1989 in the middle of the night with no approval of the city, but it still remains there today. Is this the idol for Baal? I don't know. Is it a coincidence? Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. I'll let you decide. However, that there certainly looks like a golden calf to me. But I just might be biased because much study hath made me mad.